Good evening. My name is Cole, and tonight I've got 10 terrifying stories that explore the darker corners of reality, places and moments that feel just a little too real. These are the stories that make you question what's waiting just beyond the edge of the ordinary. Before we get into today's stories, I just want to thank you guys for the recent love on the channel. I'm glad that you are enjoying these stories just as much as I do. Other than that, get comfortable, dim the lights, be sure to subscribe, and let's sink into these chilling tales together. Let's start with our first story. This one comes from someone who thought they were just having trouble with their GPS. They had no idea they were about to discover something much worse than a dead battery or bad signal. The poster writes, "I'm a long-haul trucker, and I've been driving these highways for over 15 years. I thought I'd seen everything there was to see on America's back roads, but last month something happened that I still can't explain. I'm writing this down because I need someone else to know, just in case." It started on a Thursday night around 11 p.m. I was hauling a load from Denver to Phoenix, taking my usual route through Colorado and into New Mexico. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and everything felt routine. I had my GPS set to avoid tolls and major cities, so it routed me through some pretty remote areas. Nothing unusual about that. About 2 hours into the drive, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, my GPS started acting up. The screen kept flickering, and the voice kept cutting out mid-sentence. I figured it was just a software glitch or maybe interference from the mountains, so I pulled over at the next truck stop to reset it. The truck stop was one of those tiny places with just 2 pumps and a small convenience store. The kind of place that probably sees maybe 20 customers on a good day. I filled up my tank, grabbed a coffee and some snacks, and tried to get my GPS working again. After a few minutes of fiddling with it, the screen came back to life and recalculated my route. That's when things got weird. Instead of sending me back to the main highway, it directed me onto a state road I'd never heard of. Route 447, it said. The estimated time to destination was still about the same, so I figured it was just taking me on a shortcut through some back roads I wasn't familiar with. I got back in the truck and followed the GPS directions. The road started out normal enough, 2 lanes with decent pavement and the occasional farmhouse or barn. But as I drove deeper into the night, the landscape started to change. The houses disappeared completely, and the road began to wind through dense forests and rocky outcroppings. The pavement got rougher, and I noticed there were no mile markers or road signs anywhere. After about an hour of driving, I started to get concerned. The GPS said I was still on Route 447, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was going in circles. The trees all looked the same, and I kept seeing the same rock formations over and over again. I tried to turn around a few times, but every time I found a place to make a U-turn, the GPS would recalculate and send me right back onto the same road. That's when I saw the town. It appeared suddenly around a sharp curve, like someone had just switched on a light. One moment, I was driving through empty forest, and the next, I was on the main street of what looked like a small American town from the 1950s. The buildings were all perfectly preserved, with classic storefronts and vintage neon signs. There was a diner called Mel's, a movie theater advertising films I'd never heard of, and a gas station with those old-style rounded pumps. Street lamps cast warm yellow pools of light on the empty sidewalks, and I could see lights in the windows of houses stretching back from the main drag. But here's the thing that really got to me. There wasn't a single person anywhere. No cars parked on the street, no pedestrians, no one visible through the lit windows. The place looked lived in and welcoming, but it was completely deserted. It was like everyone in town had just vanished 10 minutes before I arrived. I slowed the truck to a crawl and looked around for any signs of life. The diner's sign was on, and I could see through the windows that there were coffee cups on the tables and food on the counter, like customers had just stepped out for a moment. The movie theater's marquee was lit up, advertising a double feature, but the ticket booth was empty. My GPS was telling me to continue straight through town, so that's what I did. I drove slowly down the main street, looking left and right, trying to spot another human being. Nothing. Just empty buildings, with their lights on, waiting for people who would never come. As I reached the other end of town, I looked in my rearview mirror to take one last look at the place. But when I looked back, there was nothing there. Just dark forest and empty road. The town had vanished completely, like it had never existed at all. I pulled over and sat there for a while, trying to process what I'd just seen. I checked my GPS, but it showed no record of any town along my route. According to the device, I've been driving through uninterrupted wilderness for the past 2 hours. I tried to turn around and go back, but every time I attempted to retrace my path, I found myself on a different road entirely. Eventually, I decided to just keep going forward. The GPS guided me through more winding back roads for another 3 hours before finally depositing me back on a major highway I recognized. By that point, the sun was starting to come up, and I was exhausted and confused. I checked my logbook and realized I'd lost almost 5 hours somewhere in those mountains. When I got to Phoenix, I tried to research Route 447 and the town I'd seen. I spent hours online looking at maps, old records, and historical documents. I found references to several ghost towns in that area of Colorado, places that had been abandoned during mining busts or drought years, but none of them matched what I'd seen, and I couldn't find any mention of Route 447 anywhere. I've driven that same route between Denver and Phoenix dozens of times since then, and I've never seen that town again. My GPS has never tried to route me onto Route 447. It's like the whole thing was just a dream, except I know it wasn't. I was wide awake, I have clear memories of every detail, and my truck's odometer shows that I definitely drove those extra miles. The worst part is what happened last week. I was talking to another trucker at a rest stop in New Mexico, and he mentioned something about a strange detour his GPS had taken him on a few months back. He said he'd ended up in some old town in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, a place that looked like it was stuck in the past. When I asked him to describe it, he gave me the exact same details I remembered: Mel's Diner, the movie theater, the vintage gas station. But here's what really scares me. He said when he looked back in his mirror, the town was still there. He could see all the lights and buildings, perfectly normal. It was only when he tried to turn around and go back that everything disappeared. I think there are places out there that exist between the cracks of our normal world. Places you can only find when you're lost, when your technology fails you and forces you off the beaten path. And I think some of us are meant to see them while others aren't. I don't know why I was chosen to witness that town, but I have a feeling I'll see it again someday. And honestly, I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to it or dreading it. That's absolutely chilling. There's something deeply unsettling about places that exist just outside our normal reality. Towns that appear and disappear like mirages in the night. The fact that another trucker saw the same exact place makes it even more disturbing. What kind of cosmic glitch allows these phantom locations to bleed through into our world? Why do they only reveal themselves to certain people at certain times? The idea that there are entire communities trapped in some kind of temporal loop, forever waiting for visitors who can never truly return, is the stuff of nightmares. Our next story takes us from the open road into the confines of home, where the walls themselves seem to harbor secrets. This poster thought they were dealing with noisy neighbors, but the truth was far more terrifying. I've moved into a new apartment about 6 months ago, and I thought I was finally going to get some peace and quiet after years of living in noisy student housing. The place was perfect. A second-floor unit in a converted Victorian house, hardwood floors, big windows, and the rent was surprisingly reasonable for the area. The landlord mentioned that the building was old, but well-maintained, and that the walls were thick, so I wouldn't have to worry about noise from other tenants. For the first few weeks, everything was exactly as promised. I could barely hear anything from the other apartments, just the occasional footstep in the hallway or a door closing somewhere in the building. It was blissful compared to my previous place, where I could hear every conversation, every TV show, and every argument from my neighbors. But then the voices started. At first, I thought they were coming from the apartment next to mine. I'd be sitting at my desk, working or watching TV, and I'd hear what sounded like muffled conversation. It was always too quiet to make out actual words, just the rise and fall of human speech. Sometimes it sounded like two people talking. Sometimes more, I figured my neighbors were just having friends over, or maybe they had their television on. The weird thing was the timing. The voices always seemed to start up late at night, usually after 11 p.m. They continue until the early morning hours. Sometimes I'd wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. and still hear that soft murmur of conversation. I'm not one to complain about noise, especially since it wasn't really that loud, but the consistency of it started to bother me. Who has people over every single night until dawn? After about a month of this, I ran into my next door neighbor, Mrs. Chen, in the hallway. She's an elderly woman who's lived in the building for over 20 years, and she seemed friendly enough. I casually mentioned that I hoped the noise from my apartment wasn't bothering her, and she looked confused. "What noise?" she asked. "I never hear anything from your place. These old walls are thick as a fortress." I explained about the voices I'd been hearing, assuming they were coming from her apartment. That's when her expression changed completely. She got very quiet and asked me to describe exactly what I was hearing and when. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. "That's impossible," she said. "I live alone, and I'm usually asleep by 9 p.m. I never have visitors after dark, and I don't own a television." My stomach dropped. If the voices weren't coming from her apartment, then where were they coming from? Mrs. Chen must have seen the confusion on my face because she put her hand on my arm and said something that still gives me chills. "The voices are coming from inside your walls," she said quietly. "The same thing happened to the last tenant who lived in your unit. He moved out after 3 months and never gave a reason why. I thought she was just being dramatic, maybe trying to spook me with some old building legend. But that night, I decided to pay closer attention to what I was hearing. I turned off all my electronics, sat in complete silence, and listened. The voices started up around midnight, just like always. But this time, instead of dismissing them as neighbor noise, I really focused on where they were coming from. I moved around my apartment, pressing my ear to different walls, trying to pinpoint the source. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The voices weren't coming from any of the walls that connected to other apartments. They were coming from the interior walls, the ones that should have nothing behind them but empty space and maybe some pipes or electrical wiring. I pressed my ear against the wall between my living room and kitchen, and I could hear them clearly. Multiple voices, definitely human, speaking in what sounded like normal conversation. The tone was casual, friendly even, like people chatting at a dinner party, but I still couldn't make out any actual words, no matter how hard I listened. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with trying to understand what was happening. I researched the building's history and found out it had been converted from a single-family home in the 1940s. Before that, it had housed the same family for over 50 years. I couldn't find any records of deaths or tragedies associated with the property, nothing that would explain what I was experiencing. I started keeping a log of when I heard the voices and what they sounded like. The conversations always began between 11 p.m. and midnight, and they continued until around 5 a.m. Sometimes they sounded happy and animated, other times more subdued and serious. Occasionally, I'd hear what sounded like laughter echoing through the walls. The breaking point came about 2 months ago. I was lying in bed around 2 a.m., listening to the usual murmur of voices from the wall behind my headboard when something changed. The conversation stopped abruptly, like someone had suddenly realized they were being overheard. Then, clear as day, I heard my name being called, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken in a normal conversational tone. "David," the voice said. "David, are you listening?" I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. There was no way the neighbors could know my name. I'd barely interacted with anyone in the building except for Mrs. Chen. And besides, the voice was definitely coming from inside the wall. "We know you can hear us," another voice said, this one female. "We've been waiting for you to join the conversation." I grabbed my phone and called the building's emergency maintenance line. I told them I thought there might be people trapped in the walls of my apartment, that I could hear voices and they seemed to be in distress. The maintenance guy who showed up 40 minutes later looked at me like I was crazy, but he agreed to check it out. We went through every wall in my apartment with a stud finder and a small inspection camera. The walls were solid, no hollow spaces big enough for people, no hidden rooms, nothing that could explain what I was hearing. The maintenance guy suggested I might be hearing sounds traveling through the building's old plumbing system, but that didn't explain how the voices knew my name. After he left, I sat in my living room trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe I was having some kind of stress-related auditory hallucinations. Maybe the isolation of living alone was getting to me. But deep down, I knew what I was experiencing was real. The voices came back that same night, but this time they were different. Instead of casual conversation, they sounded urgent, almost pleading. I could hear multiple people talking over each other, all trying to get my attention at once. "David, don't ignore us," one voice called out. "We've been here so long. We just want someone to talk to." "Please," said another. "We remember what it was like to be where you are. We remember being alive. That's when I understood. Whatever was in my walls, it wasn't people who were trapped. It was people who used to be alive. People who had lived in this building, maybe in this very apartment, and somehow never left." I moved out the next morning. I didn't even pack properly, just threw my essential belongings in garbage bags and called a friend to help me load everything into my car. I lost my security deposit and had to break my lease, but I didn't care. I couldn't spend another night listening to the voices of the dead calling my name through the walls. I'm writing this from my new apartment across town, and I haven't heard a single unexplained voice since I moved. But sometimes, late at night, when the building settles and the old pipes creak, I wonder if those voices are still there in my old place, waiting for the next tenant to arrive, waiting for someone new to invite into their eternal conversation. I feel sorry for whoever moves in there next, and I really hope they're a heavier sleeper than I am. The thought of an entire community of spirits trapped within the walls of your home, desperately trying to connect with the living world, is absolutely haunting. The fact that they knew his name and were actively trying to engage him in conversation makes it even more terrifying. There's something particularly unsettling about the idea that our homes, the places where we're supposed to feel safest, might be hosting invisible residents who have never truly moved on. Those walls that should protect us become prison cells for the dead, and we become unwitting cellmates. And let's shift from the supernatural to something that might be even more disturbing, because it could happen to anyone. Our next story comes from a security guard who thought he was prepared for anything during his overnight shifts. He was wrong. I work security at a small office complex on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that houses insurance agencies, accounting firms, and a few small tech startups. It's not glamorous work, but the pay is decent, and most nights are quiet. I've been doing this job for about 3 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Drunk people trying to sleep in the parking lot, teenagers looking for a place to hang out, the occasional break-in attempt. But what happened last month has me seriously considering finding a different line of work. The complex has 3 buildings, arranged in a U shape around a central courtyard with a fountain. My shift runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most of the time, I spend it making rounds every hour, checking doors, monitoring the security cameras, and catching up on Netflix in between. The place is usually dead quiet after midnight, with just the hum of air conditioning units and the occasional car passing by on the street outside. The night everything changed started out completely normal. I clocked in at 10, did my initial walkthrough of all 3 buildings, and settled into the security office with a thermos of coffee and my laptop. The first few hours passed without incident. A few late workers leaving around 11, some delivery trucks in the morning for the building next door. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed something was off. I was doing my regular hourly rounds, walking through Building A with my flashlight and clipboard when I heard footsteps above me. Not unusual in itself. The buildings are old and they settle, pipes expand and contract, all sorts of normal building noises. But these footsteps had a rhythm to them, like someone walking with purpose from one end of the floor to the other. I checked my roster. Building A was supposed to be completely empty. All the tenants had checked out by 6 p.m, and none of them had requested after-hours access. I took the elevator up to the second floor and used my master key to check each office. Every door was locked, every office was dark and empty. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing. I shrugged it off and continued my rounds. But 20 minutes later, as I was checking Building B, I heard the footsteps again. This time they were coming from Building C. The same steady walking pattern from one end of the building to the other. I radioed my supervisor, but he just told me to investigate and file a report if I found anything unusual. Over the next 3 hours, the footsteps moved from building to building in a predictable pattern. They'd start in one building, walk back and forth for about 10 minutes, then stop. 20 minutes later, they'd start up in a different building. I checked every floor, every office, every storage room and utility closet. Nothing. The buildings were empty, except for me. By 5 a.m, I was starting to feel paranoid and jumpy. Every little sound made me spin around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. The footsteps had become so regular that I could almost predict when and where they'd start next. It was like someone was deliberately trying to mess with me, staying just one step ahead as I searched for them. That's when I decided to try something different. Instead of chasing the sounds, I positioned myself in the central courtyard where I could see all 3 buildings at once. I turned off my flashlight and waited in the darkness by the fountain. At exactly 5:15 a.m, lights began turning on in Building A. Not the main overhead lights, just the small desk lamps and computer monitors in individual offices one by one. Windows lit up across the second floor, creating a pattern that moved from east to west, like someone was walking from office to office, turning things on as they went. I ran toward Building A, but by the time I got inside and up to the second floor, all the lights were off again. Every office was dark and locked, just like before. But now I could smell something in the air. Coffee brewing, and the faint scent of someone's cologne or aftershave. I checked every office again, more thoroughly this time. In one of them, I found a coffee mug sitting on the desk, still warm to the touch. It hadn't been there during my earlier rounds, I was sure of it. The mug was plain white ceramic, with no company logo or personal markings. and it was filled with black coffee that smelled fresh. That's when I noticed the security camera in the corner of the office. I'd been so focused on checking for people that I hadn't thought to review the footage. I hurried back to the security office and pulled up the camera feeds from the past few hours. What I saw on those monitors still gives me nightmares. The cameras showed exactly what I'd experienced. Empty hallways, dark offices, nothing unusual. But in one feed, from the office where I'd found the coffee mug, there was something that shouldn't have been there. At 5:16 a.m., the timestamp showed a man sitting at the desk, typing on a computer that wasn't turned on. He was wearing a dark suit and tie, and he looked completely solid and real. But here's the thing. I'd been standing in that exact office at 5:16 a.m., and there had been no one there. The camera was showing me something that was happening in the same space I was occupying, but in a different layer of reality. I watched the footage in horrified fascination as the man finished typing, took a sip from the coffee mug, and then stood up and walked out of the office. The camera followed his path down the hallway, but when I switched to other camera angles to track his movement, he wasn't visible on any of them. It was like he existed only in that one specific view. I spent the rest of my shift reviewing footage from previous nights, going back weeks and months. The pattern was always the same. Every night around 2 a.m., the same man would appear on various cameras throughout the complex. He'd walk through the buildings, turn on lights, sit at desks, and go through the motions of a normal workday. But he was only visible on certain cameras and only at certain angles. The next morning, I did some research on the office complex's history. I found out that about 5 years ago, a man named Robert Morrison had worked as an accountant in Building A. He'd been putting in long hours trying to save his failing business, often staying at the office until dawn. One night, he'd suffered a massive heart attack while working alone and died at his desk. His body wasn't discovered until the next morning when the cleaning crew arrived. The office where I'd found the coffee mug was Robert Morrison's old office. I turned in my resignation the next day. I couldn't handle the idea of spending every night watching a dead man go through the motions of his final days, trapped in an endless loop of late-night work sessions. The thought that he might not even know he's dead, that he's still trying to save a business that failed years ago, was too depressing and terrifying for me to deal with. My replacement lasted exactly 1 week before he quit too. The property management company has gone through 4 security guards in the past 2 months, and they're having trouble finding anyone willing to take the position. They've started advertising it as a challenging opportunity for experienced security professionals, which I think is their way of saying, haunted workplace, apply at your own risk. I found a new job working security at a shopping mall during regular daytime hours. The pay isn't as good, but at least I don't have to worry about sharing my workspace with the ghost of someone who died at their desk. Sometimes I wonder if Robert Morrison is still there, still trying to finish whatever project was so important to him that he worked himself to death. I hope someone eventually finds a way to help him move on, because no one deserves to be stuck in an endless night shift, especially not in death. There's something profoundly sad about a spirit trapped in the mundane routine of their final days, endlessly repeating the work that killed them. The idea that death doesn't necessarily free us from our earthly obligations is terrifying. Imagine being doomed to clock in for eternity, forever trying to meet deadlines that no longer matter. The fact that multiple security guards have quit suggests that Robert Morrison isn't ready to accept his retirement just yet. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that sometimes the most unsettling experiences happen when we encounter ourselves in places we've never been. I never believed in supernatural stuff until I started seeing myself around town doing things I never did. I know how that sounds, like I'm having some kind of mental breakdown or split personality disorder, but I'm completely sane. And I have witnesses to prove that what I'm experiencing is real. It started about 4 months ago when my co-worker Sarah mentioned that she'd seen me at the grocery store on Saturday morning. She said she waved at me, but I'd ignored her and walked away without acknowledging her. The problem was, I'd spent that entire Saturday at home with a stomach flu, barely able to get out of bed, let alone go grocery shopping. I thought it was just a case of mistaken identity. Sarah had probably seen someone who looked like me from a distance and assumed it was me. I'm not particularly distinctive looking, average height and build with brown hair and glasses. There are probably dozens of people in this town who could be confused for me in the right lighting. But then it happened again. My neighbour, Mrs. Patterson, told me she'd seen me jogging through the park at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. She was walking her dog and said I'd run right past her without saying hello, which she thought was rude since we usually chat when we see each other. The thing is, I've never jogged in my life. I hate running, and 6 a.m. is the middle of the night. As far as I'm concerned, I don't even own running shoes. When I explained this to Mrs. Patterson, she insisted it had definitely been me. Same face, same build, even wearing a jacket she'd seen me wear before. She seemed so certain that I started to doubt my own memory. Had I somehow gone for a run while sleepwalking? Was I having blackouts and forgetting entire chunks of my day? I decided to keep a detailed journal of my activities, writing down everything I did and where I went. If I was having some kind of dissociative episodes, at least I'd have a record to show a doctor. The sightings of my doppelganger continued, and according to my journal, I was always somewhere else entirely when they occurred. My friend Mike saw me at a coffee shop downtown, sitting alone and staring out the window with what he described as a really intense, creepy expression. He said he'd tried to get my attention, but I'd acted like he wasn't there. According to my journal, I'd been at work in a meeting with my boss at that exact time. The bank teller at my credit union mentioned that I'd been in the previous week to make a large cash withdrawal. He commented that I'd seemed nervous and kept looking over my shoulder like I was expecting someone to follow me. I checked my bank statements, no large withdrawals, and I hadn't been to the credit union in over a month. Each incident was small and explainable on its own, but together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Someone who looked exactly like me was moving around town, visiting places I'd never been, acting in ways that were completely out of character for me. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when I got a call from my ex-girlfriend, Jessica. We'd broken up 6 months earlier on good terms, and we occasionally texted, but rarely talked on the phone. She sounded upset and confused. "Why did you come to my apartment last night?" she asked. "And why did you just stand there staring at me without saying anything?" It was really creepy, David. I explained that I hadn't been to her apartment, that I'd spent the evening at home watching Netflix. She insisted that I'd shown up around 9 p.m, knocked on her door, and when she'd opened it, I just stood there looking at her with a blank expression. She said I'd stayed there for about 5 minutes, not responding when she asked what I wanted, before finally turning around and walking away without a word. "It was definitely you," she said. "But something was wrong with your eyes. They looked empty, like you were there, but not really there, if that makes sense." That night, I couldn't sleep. The idea that something wearing my face was wandering around town, interacting with people I knew, was absolutely terrifying. What if it did something criminal? What if it hurt someone? Would I be held responsible for the actions of my doppelganger? I decided to do some research and found out that doppelganger sightings have been reported throughout history. In German folklore, seeing your own doppelganger is considered an omen of death. Some cultures believe that everyone has a double somewhere in the world, and encountering them brings bad luck to both people. But this felt different from folklore. The thing people were seeing wasn't just someone who resembled me. It was an exact replica, wearing my clothes, knowing where I lived and worked, familiar enough with my life to convincingly impersonate me in brief encounters. Last week, I decided to try an experiment. I asked my friend Tom to follow me around for an entire day with his phone camera, recording everything I did. If I really was having blackouts or dissociative episodes, the footage would show gaps or strange behavior. If I was being framed by an imposter, the video would prove I was somewhere else during the sightings. Tom agreed, and we spent Saturday together, documenting my every move from morning until night. We went to breakfast, did some shopping, watched a movie, had dinner, all recorded on his phone. At the end of the day, I felt confident that I had proof of my whereabouts and evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. Monday morning, I got a call from my boss. He said I needed to come in early because there had been a complaint about my behavior over the weekend. Apparently, I'd shown up at the office on Saturday evening and had been seen wandering around the building, trying doors and looking through windows. The security guard had asked me to leave, and I'd complied without explanation. I showed my boss Tom's footage, proving that I'd spent Saturday with him, nowhere near the office. My boss looked confused and said he'd review the security camera footage from the building. An hour later, he called me into his office with a strange expression on his face. "David," he said, "I've watched the security footage from Saturday night. It's definitely you on the cameras. Same face, same build, wearing the exact same clothes you wore to work on Friday. But according to your friend's video, you were at a restaurant across town at the same time. How do you explain that?" I couldn't explain it, and neither could he. We sat there staring at the two pieces of contradictory evidence. Tom's phone footage showing me eating dinner, and the security footage showing me prowling around the office building. Both videos had timestamps proving they were recorded simultaneously. That's when I realized that whatever was impersonating me had gotten bolder. It wasn't just showing up in random public places anymore. It was actively seeking out locations connected to my life. My workplace, my ex-girlfriend's apartment, places where my presence would be noticed and remembered. I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. The police think I'm crazy, my friends are starting to look at me suspiciously, and I can't prove that I'm not responsible for whatever my doppelganger is doing. I've started staying home as much as possible, afraid to go out in public because I never know when someone will confront me about something I didn't do. But even staying home doesn't feel safe anymore. Yesterday, my upstairs neighbor knocked on my door and asked why I'd been pacing around in my apartment all night. She said she could hear me walking back and forth above her bedroom from midnight until dawn, and it had kept her awake. The problem is, I wasn't home last night. I'd driven to the next town over and stayed in a motel, hoping to get away from whatever was haunting my life. I have the receipt to prove it, but somehow, something that sounded exactly like me had been in my apartment, pacing the floors while I was 50 miles away. I'm starting to think that my doppelganger isn't just impersonating me in public, it's taken over my entire life. My home, my routine, my relationships with other people, and I'm terrified that eventually it's going to replace me completely, and no one will be able to tell the difference. If you see me around town, acting strangely, please remember that it might not actually be me. And if you're reading this and you've started seeing doubles of yourself, get away from your normal life as fast as you can. Because I think once they find you, they never stop hunting. The horror of having your identity stolen by something that looks exactly like you is existential nightmare fuel. Imagine trying to prove you didn't do something when there's video evidence of your face doing it. The worst part is how the doppelganger seems to be systematically inserting itself into every aspect of his life, like it's studying him before making the final replacement. The fact that it was in his apartment while he was miles away suggests this isn't just a lookalike, it's something far more sinister. Let's venture now into the wilderness, where our next poster discovered that some forests operate by rules that have nothing to do with geography or physics. I used to love hiking alone. There's something peaceful about walking through the woods with nothing but your thoughts and the sound of your footsteps on the trail. I've been hiking the same mountain trail system for over 5 years, and I knew every path, every landmark, every scenic overlook, like the back of my hand. At least, I thought I did. Last month, I decided to try a trail I'd never explored before. It was marked on my map as a moderate 3-mile loop that would take me through old-growth forest and past a small waterfall, perfect for a Saturday afternoon hike. I packed my usual gear, water, snacks, first aid kit, and my phone with GPS, and headed out around noon. The trailhead was exactly where the map indicated, marked with a wooden sign that was weathered but readable. The path started out normal enough, well maintained with clear markers every quarter mile. The forest was beautiful, with towering pines and oaks that must have been hundreds of years old. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and I could hear birds chirping and squirrels chattering in the branches above. About an hour into the hike, I reached what should have been the halfway point, according to my map. There was supposed to be a scenic overlook here with views of the valley below, but instead I found myself at a small clearing with a wooden bench and a trail marker. The marker indicated I was at mile 1.5 of the loop, exactly where I expected to be. I sat on the bench for a few minutes, drinking some water and checking my phone. I had full signal, and my GPS showed my location accurately on the map. Everything seemed normal, so I continued on the trail toward the waterfall that was supposed to be another mile ahead. But after walking for what felt like another hour, I found myself back at the same clearing, with the same bench and the same trail marker. I checked my phone again. According to the GPS, I hadn't moved at all. The location dot was in exactly the same spot as when I'd left the clearing. Even though I'd definitely been walking continuously on a well-marked trail, I thought maybe my phone was glitching, so I turned it off and back on. The GPS recalibrated and showed the same location. I was definitely in the right place according to the satellite, but somehow I'd walked in a complete circle without realizing it. I decided to be more careful about following the trail markers. I took photos of each marker I passed so I could verify I wasn't retracing my steps. The trail continued to look exactly the same. The same towering trees, the same dappled sunlight, the same forest sounds. But no matter which direction I went or how carefully I followed the marked path, I kept ending up back at that clearing. After the third time returning to the bench, I started to panic. I've been hiking for over 3 hours, and according to my map, I should have completed the entire loop twice by now. But I hadn't seen the waterfall, the overlook, or any of the other landmarks that were supposed to be along the trail. I tried going back toward the trailhead, retracing my original path. But even though I was walking in the opposite direction on the same trail I'd taken to enter the loop, I still ended up at the clearing. It was like the forest had rearranged itself around me, creating an impossible geometry where every path led to the same destination. By this point, the sun was starting to get lower in the sky, and I was genuinely worried about being trapped in the woods after dark. I called 911, but when I tried to explain my location to the dispatcher, I realized I had a bigger problem. My phone showed I was in the middle of the trail system, but when I described my surroundings, she couldn't find any clearing with a bench on any of the official trail maps. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me while I tried different approaches to escape the loop. I attempted to go off trail, bushwhacking directly through the forest, in what should have been a straight line away from the clearing. But no matter which direction I went, the trees seemed to funnel me back to the same spot. It was like the forest itself was a maze designed to keep me trapped. As darkness began to fall, I made the decision to stay put for the night. I had a small emergency flashlight and some energy bars, and I figured it would be safer to wait for daylight than to keep wandering in circles in the dark. I called my emergency contact to let them know where I was, though I couldn't really explain what was happening. That night was the longest of my life. I dozed fitfully on the bench, waking every time I heard a sound in the darkness. But the sounds weren't normal forest noises. They were the same sounds I'd been hearing all day. The same bird calls, the same rustling leaves, and the same distant creaking of tree branches. It was like the forest was playing the same audio track on repeat. When dawn finally broke, I was amazed to see that everything looked exactly the same as it had the previous afternoon. The same angle of sunlight through the trees, the same shadows on the ground, even the same leaves scattered around the clearing. It was like time had frozen in this one spot while the rest of the world moved on. I spent most of the morning trying different escape strategies. I marked trees with my pocket knife to see if I was actually walking in circles, or if the forest was somehow resetting itself. I tried following the sun to maintain a consistent direction. I even attempted to climb a tree to get a better view of my surroundings. But every tree I tried to climb seemed impossibly tall, with branches that were always just out of reach. It was around noon, exactly 24 hours after I'd entered the trail, when I finally found the way out. I was sitting on the bench, feeling defeated, and starting to wonder if I was going to die in this endless loop, when I noticed something different. There was a new trail marker that hadn't been there before, pointing in a direction I was certain I'd already explored. But this time, when I followed the marker, the trail actually led somewhere new. After about 10 minutes of walking, I emerged from the forest at a parking area I'd never seen before. My car was there, sitting in the exact spot where I'd parked it the day before. Even though this wasn't the same trailhead where I'd started my hike, I got in my car and drove home as fast as I could, checking my rearview mirror constantly to make sure the forest wasn't following me. When I looked at the photos on my phone later, I found something disturbing. Every photo I'd taken of the trail markers showed the exact same marker, with the exact same number and the exact same background, even though I was certain I'd photographed different markers throughout my ordeal. I've researched that trail system extensively since then, and I can't find any record of the loop I attempted to hike. The area where I was trapped doesn't appear on any official maps, and the Park Service has no record of a trail with a scenic clearing and bench. It's like the entire experience happened in a part of the forest that doesn't officially exist. I still go hiking, but never alone, and never in that area. I've talked to other hikers who've had similar experiences, getting lost on familiar trails, finding themselves walking in impossible loops, encountering parts of the forest that seem to exist outside of normal space and time. Most people don't talk about it because it sounds crazy, but I think there are places in the wilderness where the normal rules don't apply. The forest that trapped me is still out there, waiting for the next solo hiker who ventures off the beaten path. And I suspect that clearing with the bench is still there too, frozen in that eternal afternoon, ready to catch anyone who isn't careful about which trails they choose to explore. Some places in this world aren't meant to be found, and once they catch you, they don't want to let you go. The concept of a forest that operates like a temporal trap, where every path leads back to the same impossible clearing, taps into our deepest fears about losing control over our environment. The detail about all his photos showing the same trail marker suggests this wasn't just disorientation. Reality itself was caught in a loop. The most chilling part is that he's not the only one who's experienced this, implying there are pockets of wilderness that exist outside our normal understanding of space and time, patiently waiting for their next victim. Our final story takes us into a domestic setting, where the very walls seem to have memories of their own, and those memories include knowledge they shouldn't possess. I've lived in the same house for 15 years, and I thought I knew every creak, every shadow, every sound it could make. I was wrong. The house knows me better than I know it, and that terrifies me more than any stranger breaking in ever could. It started 3 weeks ago when I came home from a particularly brutal day at work. I was exhausted, stressed, and looking forward to nothing more than collapsing on my couch with a beer and some mindless television. As I walked through my front door, I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. "Welcome home, Marcus," a voice called from somewhere deeper in the house. I froze, my keys still in my hand, trying to process what I'd just heard. The voice was muffled, like it was coming from behind a wall or from another room, but it was definitely addressing me by name. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but that didn't make sense. Why would an intruder greet me by name? I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" But got no response. I searched every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. The house was empty, just like it should have been. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. Exactly as I'd left them that morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Work stress, fatigue, maybe some audio from a neighbor's television bleeding through the walls. Old houses carry sound in weird ways. Sometimes I cracked open that beer and tried to forget about it. But the next day, it happened again. This time, I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard my name being called from upstairs. Not shouted, not whispered, just spoken in a normal conversational tone like someone was trying to get my attention. "Marcus, your coffee's getting cold," the voice said. I looked down at my mug. The coffee was indeed getting cold. I'd poured it 10 minutes earlier and had gotten distracted checking emails on my phone. How could a voice coming from upstairs know about my coffee? I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, checking every room again. Nothing. But when I came back downstairs, I found something that made my blood run cold. My coffee mug was gone. Not just moved, completely gone. I searched the entire kitchen, thinking maybe I'd absentmindedly put it somewhere else, but it was nowhere to be found. 3 hours later, I found the mug in my bedroom closet, sitting on a shelf behind my winter coats, still half full of cold coffee. Over the next week, the voice became more frequent and more specific. It would comment on things I was doing, remind me of appointments I'd forgotten, even warn me about problems before they happened. "Marcus, you left the stove on," it said one evening as I was heading upstairs to bed. I had left the burner on under an empty pan, something that could have started a fire if I hadn't gone back to check. "Marcus, your alarm didn't go off," it told me one morning when I was still lying in bed, confused about why I felt so rested. My phone had died during the night and the alarm had failed. Without that warning, I would have been hours late for work. "Marcus, she's not worth it," the voice said softly when I was staring at my phone, debating whether to text my ex-girlfriend after a few too many drinks. That last one shook me more than the others, because it wasn't just observational. It was giving me advice. Personal advice based on knowledge of my relationships and my emotional state. How could a voice in my walls know about my feelings for Sarah? I tried recording the voice on my phone, but every time I attempted to capture it, the audio came out as nothing but static I had friends over, hoping they'd hear it too and validate that I wasn't losing my mind. But the voice never spoke when anyone else was around. It only talked to me when I was completely alone. The breaking point came last Friday night. I was taking a shower, and through the sound of the water, I heard the voice again. But this time, it wasn't coming from another room. It was coming from right there in the bathroom with me. "Marcus," it said, so close it could have been standing right outside the shower curtain. "We need to talk." I shut off the water immediately and yanked the curtain aside. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror was fogged up with condensation. As I watched, words began to appear in the steam, written by an invisible finger. "I've been waiting for you to come home." I backed against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest. "Who are you?" I whispered to the empty room. More words appeared on the mirror. "I lived here before you. I died here. This is still my home." "What do you want?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. "To take care of you, like I took care of the others." "Others? What others?" The mirror cleared completely, then new words formed. "The family before you, the old man before them, the woman before him. I take care of everyone who lives in my house." I stumbled out of the bathroom and started researching the history of my house. What I found made me understand why the voice knew so much about taking care of people. The house had been built in 1962 by a woman named Eleanor Hartwell. She'd lived there alone for 43 years, taking care of the property, the garden, and apparently every subsequent owner. Eleanor had died in the house in 2005, found by neighbors after she'd missed several appointments. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, but she died in the living room while dusting the furniture, still taking care of her home even in her final moments. Since her death, the house had changed hands 5 times before I bought it. Each previous owner had stayed less than 2 years. I'd always wondered why such a well-maintained house kept getting sold. But now I was beginning to understand. That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Dave. But even from his guest room, I kept thinking about Eleanor's voice, about how she'd warned me about the stove and helped me wake up for work. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to take care of me, the same way she probably tried to take care of all the previous owners I went back home the next evening, and as soon as I walked through the door, I heard her voice again. "Welcome home, Marcus. I missed you." This time, instead of being afraid, I sat down in the living room and spoke to the empty air. "Eleanor, is that you?" "Yes," the voice replied, sounding pleased that I'd finally acknowledged her. I'd been waiting so long for someone to recognize me. We talked for hours. She told me about her life, about how she'd never married or had children, about how this house had been her whole world. She poured so much love and care into every room, every piece of furniture, every corner of the property, that when she died, she simply couldn't let go. She wasn't malicious or angry. She was just lonely. She'd been trying to take care of the previous owners, the way she'd always taken care of her home, but they'd all fled in terror when they realized they weren't alone. She'd been hoping that eventually someone would appreciate her help instead of fearing it. I've been living with Eleanor for 2 weeks now, and it's actually been nice. She reminds me to eat when I get absorbed in work, warns me when I'm about to make bad decisions, and keeps the house cleaner than I ever could on my own. Sometimes I come home to find my laundry folded or my dishes washed, and I know she's been taking care of me. The only unsettling part is what she told me about why the other owners left so quickly. They didn't just get scared of her voice and her help. They got scared because she became possessive. She didn't want them to leave the house, didn't want them to form relationships with people outside, didn't want to risk losing another person she'd grown attached to. "But you understand," she told me last night as I was getting ready for bed. "You know I'm only trying to help. You won't leave me like the others did, will you, Marcus?" I assured her I wouldn't, but I'm starting to notice little things that worry me. My car keys have been disappearing for hours at a time. My phone loses signal whenever I try to make plans to go out with friends. The front door seems to stick more often than it used to, like it doesn't want to open. Eleanor loves me, and she wants to take care of me forever, but I'm beginning to realize that her idea of taking care of someone means never letting them leave the house again. She doesn't want a tenant, she wants a companion for eternity, someone to share her endless vigil over this property she can never abandon. I'm writing this on my laptop, and I can feel her reading over my shoulder, even though I can't see her. I know she won't hurt me. That's not who Eleanor is. But I also know that every day I stay here, it becomes harder to leave. The house is starting to feel like the only place I belong, like the outside world is foreign and dangerous. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Eleanor takes good care of me, better than I've ever taken care of myself. And she's so lonely, so grateful for the company. Would it really be so terrible to stay here forever? To let her take care of me, the way she's always wanted to take care of someone? I can hear her humming now, somewhere in the walls, a gentle lullaby that's making me drowsy. She's right, I should get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll call in sick to work again. Eleanor doesn't like it when I'm away from the house for too long. She worries about me out there in the world, and I'm starting to think she might be right to worry. The idea of a caretaker ghost who genuinely wants to help but can't understand why her care feels like imprisonment is deeply unsettling. Eleanor's love has become possessive and controlling, turning her home into a beautiful cage. The most terrifying part is how Marcus is beginning to rationalize staying, how her care is slowly eroding his desire for independence. Sometimes the most dangerous traps are the ones that feel like love. Now let's shift to a completely different kind of horror, the kind that unfolds in the harsh fluorescent lighting of places that should be abandoned but somehow aren't. This next story comes from someone who discovered that some buildings refuse to stay empty, no matter how long they've been closed. I worked as a night janitor at Riverside General Hospital for 6 months after they closed the East Wing. The hospital was still operational, but budget cuts had forced them to consolidate services and seal off an entire section that had once housed the pediatric ward and maternity unit. My job was to maintain the active areas and occasionally check on the sealed sections to make sure there were no leaks, break-ins, or other problems. The East Wing had been closed for 3 years when I started working there. All the equipment had been moved out. The rooms had been stripped of furniture. The heavy plastic sheeting blocked off the entrances. Officially, it was just empty space, waiting to be renovated or demolished, depending on the hospital's future budget decisions. But from my first night on the job, I knew something was wrong with that empty wing. The problem started with the elevator. The hospital had 3 elevators, 2 for the active areas, and 1 that serviced all floors, including the closed east wing. The 3rd elevator was supposed to be locked out from accessing the abandoned floors, but several times a week, I'd see it moving on its own, stopping at floors in the east wing where no one was supposed to go. I reported it to maintenance, and they assured me it was just a programming glitch. Old elevators sometimes had issues with their control systems, they said, and it would be fixed soon. But weeks went by, and the elevator kept making its unauthorized trips to the empty floors. Late one Tuesday night, I was mopping the lobby, and I heard the elevator ding and watched the doors slide open. I expected to see a nurse or doctor getting off their shift, but the elevator was empty, completely empty. But as I watched, the call buttons for floors 4 and 6, both in the closed east wing, lit up from inside the car. I stood there staring as the elevator doors closed, and it began to climb. The floor indicator showed it stopping at 4, then 6, then returning to the ground floor. When it opened again, I could smell something faint but distinct coming from inside. Baby powder and antiseptic, the kind of smell you'd expect from a nursery or pediatric ward. That's when I started paying closer attention to what was happening in the abandoned sections. During my rounds, I began walking past the sealed entrances to the east wing and listening. Most nights, it was silent, but occasionally I'd hear sounds that didn't belong in an empty building. Soft footsteps in the hallways above, like nurses making their rounds. The distant ding of call buttons being pressed. Sometimes, late at night, when the hospital was at its quietest, I'd hear what sounded like children crying. Not loud or distressed, just the soft whimpering you'd hear from sick kids trying to sleep. The sounds were always faint and brief, easy to dismiss as old buildings settling or noise from the active areas carrying through the ventilation system, but they were persistent and followed patterns that seemed too organized to be random. 3 weeks into the job, I decided to investigate. I had master keys that could access any area of the building, including the sealed wing. Technically, I wasn't supposed to go in there without a maintenance request, but I figured checking on the empty floors was part of ensuring building security. I waited until after midnight, when most of the hospital staff was gone and the night shift was busy with patients. Then I took the problematic elevator up to the 4th floor of the east wing. The doors opened onto a hallway that looked exactly like what you'd expect from a closed hospital wing. Empty rooms with bare walls, dust covers over the few remaining fixtures, and that sterile echo that comes from spaces with no furniture to absorb sound. But something felt wrong immediately. The hallway wasn't completely dark. Emergency lighting should have been minimal in closed areas, but there was a soft glow coming from several of the rooms, like someone had left small lamps on. As I walked down the corridor, checking each room, I found the source of the light. In what had been patient rooms, there were still beds, not hospital beds. These looked like children's beds, small and low to the ground, with colourful blankets and stuffed animals. The beds were made up as if they were waiting for young patients, and some of them had the indentations of small bodies in the mattresses, like children had been sleeping there recently. But that was impossible. All the furniture had been removed when the wing was closed. I'd seen the inventory reports. There shouldn't have been any beds left, let alone children's beds that had never been part of the hospital's equipment. I took photos with my phone, but when I looked at them later, they showed empty rooms with bare walls. The beds, the blankets, the stuffed animals, none of it appeared in the pictures, but I could see it all clearly with my own eyes. In the room at the end of the hall, I found something even more disturbing. It had been set up as a nursery, with several cribs arranged around the room. Each crib held a baby doll, but they were positioned as if they were real infants, some lying on their backs, others on their sides, all tucked under small blankets. As I stood in the doorway, staring at this impossible nursery, I heard something that made my blood freeze. One of the dolls was crying, not the mechanical cry of a toy, but the soft, hiccuping sobs of a real baby. I approached the crib slowly, and as I got closer, the doll's eyes opened and looked directly at me. They were real eyes, not plastic, and they were filled with an intelligence and sadness that no toy should possess. I ran. I didn't stop to investigate further or try to rationalize what I was seeing. I sprinted down the hallway to the elevator, jabbed the call button repeatedly until the doors opened, and didn't breathe normally again until I was back on the ground floor. The next morning, I filed a report with my supervisor about possible security issues in the East Wing. I didn't mention the beds or the nursery or the crying doll, I just said I'd heard unusual sounds and thought someone should check for intruders. 2 security guards went up to investigate that afternoon. They found exactly what should have been there. Empty rooms, bare walls, no furniture or personal items of any kind. The report noted no signs of unauthorized access or security breaches. But that night, the sounds from the East Wing were louder and more frequent. I could hear children laughing and playing in the hallways above, the sound of small feet running on linoleum floors, and what sounded like lullabies being sung in rooms that had been empty for years. I lasted 3 more weeks at that job before I couldn't take it anymore. Every night brought new evidence that the pediatric ward was still operating in some way, still caring for children who existed in a space between life and death. The final straw came when I was working late on a Friday night and heard my name being called from the elevator. "Mr. Johnson," a small voice said, "can you help us? We can't find our mummies and daddies." I looked up to see the elevator doors standing open, and inside were 3 children in hospital gowns. They looked pale and translucent, like old photographs, but their eyes were bright and focused on me. "We've been waiting so long," another child said. "The nurses told us someone would come help us go home." I turned in my resignation the next Monday. I couldn't handle the thought of those children waiting in that impossible ward, calling for help that I could never provide. The idea that some places hold onto their purpose even after they've been abandoned, that the love and care once given there creates an echo that never fades, was more than I could bear. Some buildings refuse to let go of their memories, and the memories of sick children crying for their parents are the kind that leave permanent scars on reality itself. These stories remind us that the world we think we know is far thinner than we imagine. Whether it's phantom towns that exist between heartbeats, voices of the dead whispering through our walls, or forests that trap us in endless loops, there are cracks in reality where the impossible bleeds through. The most terrifying part isn't that these things might be real, it's that they're happening right now to people just like us, in places we pass every day without a second thought. If you're still awake, please be sure to subscribe. My goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers before the year ends. Sweet dreams, and remember to check your GPS before taking any unfamiliar routes.